Hello, sweet parents. Welcome to the When Our Adult Children Walk Away podcast. My name is Dr. Janet Steinkamp, and during each episode of When Our Adult Children Walk Away, I will provide my professional and personal insights, information and opportunities for your self-reflection and growth, tips and tricks to make every day count, and encouragement to keep moving forward. I'm here to help you dig deep and get down to the root causes so that you can find your way out of the darkness to a positive and lasting relationship. Grab your notebook and a pen, settle into your favorite chair, and let's get to it. In this episode, we are digging deep into the differences between accountability, amends, and apology. There's been a lot of chatter out on the internet, in the different Facebook groups, and several new articles out on Substack about whether estranged parents need to apologize. And what's the difference between an apology and amends? And when we use them, what's the purpose of each? And actually, I think there might be some insight here into why amends letters sometimes fail. If they're not used correctly, if they're not written to make amends, then they fail. And sometimes our adult children just aren't ready to listen. And so no matter what we would say in a letter, it wouldn't make a difference. And frankly, sometimes they just don't read them. So let's look first at the definitions. So an apology is usually verbal. It expresses regret. So we need to make sure people know that we regret something. And we acknowledge something that we did or said that was hurtful, some kind of wrongdoing. For example, I'm sorry I yelled. It's usually an apology for an action or something we said. Now, let's see, accountability. That's when we take ownership for something. For an action, we recognize what we did wrong, and we accept responsibility. So accountability and responsibility sometimes are used interchangeably, but accountability is when we recognize it. Responsibility is what it is, right? We have a responsibility to something. We have a responsibility to be respectful. We hold ourselves accountable when we don't uphold that responsibility. That's accountability. I talk a lot about accountability in the work I do because our adult children often are asking us to, they use the term own our stuff or own our, we have to own our stuff, right? So that's accountability. And then an amends letter, or to make amends, it's when we take concrete action, when we take action to repair something. Some kind of a harm, or we demonstrate some kind of commitment to change. I see what I've done in the past. I see that it's hurt you. I am sorry. There's the apology. And there's accountability in that statement. And I want to show up differently now. That's the action. So we say we're going to take an action and then we follow through. That's the amends. When are each of these necessary? Well, we use an apology to acknowledge a specific mistake. It's not unusual when I hear a parent say, I have nothing to apologize for. I didn't do anything. I have nothing to apologize for because I didn't do what they say I did. Typically, when I say, well, what are they saying you did? They will give me an example of an event. What I hear is that that's the crowning blow. That was the last straw. But that there is most likely a history of similar events in the past where somebody crossed a boundary, shared a secret when they weren't supposed to be, or just wasn't confidential, said something casually without thinking that was hurtful. It might be as simple as, wow, you look like you swallowed a basketball when your daughter is pregnant. That may be the last offending statement, which by itself might not be tasteful, it might not be particularly kind, but not enough of a statement on its own, standalone, to cause an estrangement. So an apology is for a specific mistake or a specific action. Accountability is when we take ownership for ongoing behaviors that contributed to the estrangement. So the apologizing for the final blow, the final event, is something. But the magic, what makes a difference for the adult child, is when we recognize the pattern, we recognize our consistent, ongoing behavior that people have probably pointed out to us, that we've been told about, that we've been warned about, and we just don't stop. And then an amends is when we rebuild trust. We make a statement, we hold ourselves accountable, we say we're sorry, we say what we're going to do next, and that we're going to take consistent action. And the point of it is to regain trust. Give us another chance. Please let me come back into your life. I'm ready to humble myself, own my stuff, apologize for my errors, and figure out how we move on together. All of those statements are about our behavior. Estrangement is typically about something that's happened or been happening to the person who walks away. So owning our stuff, apologizing and making amends is only the beginning. Once we do those three things, then we have to start treating our adult children differently, behaving differently. So what was happening to them stops. That's why through all of the self-reflection, figuring out what we need to hold ourselves accountable for, what we regret, what we would do differently, and how we plan to move forward, through that whole process, we're really trying to learn how, where, and when, and what was injuring our adult child to such an extent that they cut off ties. If you're a parent listening who has not gone into a no-contact situation, I'm going to say, count yourself lucky. Now, there's nothing lucky about estrangement except that it gives us an opportunity to figure out what's not right for our adult child and correct it. So our relationship moving forward is healthy, respect-based, and mutually satisfying. And I say that to you parents who are not in a no-contact situation because the fact is you still have contact. It may not be pleasant and it may not be frequent. You do have communication. I know of people who have not spoken to their adult child in years. It's not uncommon to hear this. And they don't even know where their adult child is, how many grandchildren they have. If they're well, they might hear through the grapevine that their adult child is ill. They don't have any contact. So I don't say it lightly when I say, if you still have contact, count yourself lucky. It's not too late to stop that extreme no contact experience. We can work together to pull that back. Okay, the depth and scope of an apology, accountability, and amends is different dependent on the extreme nature of what's going on in your relationship. An apology by itself is often insufficient for deeper and long ongoing activities or events or experiences that are hurting this child, now an adult. It's maybe good to take a second to say, when we were raising our children, it was a different world. For the most part, those of us listening to this recording, we're doing the best we could. We were following the recommendations of our physicians. We were following what we were told in the news and through, experts on child raising and rearing and the school officials. And we were doing what our friends were doing. I mean, we weren't trying to raise children poorly. We weren't intentionally or even unintentionally neglecting our children. When people look back and think about how they were raised, it's not uncommon for any of us to think, wow, I sure wish that hadn't happened in my life, or I sure wish my parents would have figured that out. It's a normal thing, generation to generation, to look back and think, yeah, I didn't get what I needed. I'm going to make sure my kids get what they need. And then for those kids to grow up and say, yeah, I didn't get what I needed. I'm not going to let that happen to my kids. This is kind of a natural cycle. The language is more intense. The reaction is more intense. And I believe the consequences to our families, ongoing generationally, will be noticeable. That we will have generational impact from some of the changes now that are moving us into an estrangement pattern. So that's just a side note. I just want to keep this in context and not let this get so big for you as you listen that it's hard to pull yourself back in. There's a great episode on catastrophizing. There's also an episode on apology versus explanation and when to use both or either. So I just said apology is insufficient by itself in the deeper harm kind of situations where deeper harm exists. And then accountability must follow an apology to show sincerity. So the apology by itself, standalone, is not going to be enough. Accountability needs to be in that same apology. So if we use the same example, there's a crowning blow, a final event, and we owe someone an apology for that. What I said was disrespectful, and I am sorry. I also recognize that this isn't the first time. And I know I need to learn some things about myself and make some changes. So do you see, the apology and accountability are together. And then to prove your amends is lasting, that the change is going to be ongoing, past behavior needs to change. The hurt is so deep that it will take time for that wound to heal, for the trust to rebuild, and for them to allow you to demonstrate you've changed your behavior. During that time, I really encourage people I work with to practice their changed behavior. I know this is a silly example, but I use it often, especially with the doctors that I coach. When you're at Home Depot in the paint department and you feel your paint hasn't been in the shaker machine long enough, or the color isn't quite right, you don't go at the young kid standing at the register who doesn't really have much formal training and is just doing the best they can. You take a proactive, conversational approach. You ask questions to learn what's going on. You listen intently, and then you problem solve with that person. So you practice at Home Depot, practice in the grocery store, practice at the bank, practice in your workplace, practice in your family, so that these behaviors are changed and you default under pressure with your adult child. When the opportunity comes to reconnect, you default to this new behavior when you're put under pressure, because it's that under pressure moment that we snap. So we want that behavior to be changed before we get there. So we really combine and employ all three of those: apology, accountability, amends. Let's look at the ownership versus justification. Now, with an apology, we use justification to minimize our responsibility. I'm really sorry, but I was so stressed. I was so tired. We're giving ourselves an out. And our adult children don't have time for that. They don't want to hear it. They're done listening to that. And so we really need to focus on the apology. I am so sorry I just said that. I know it was hurtful. I'm working to change this behavior, and I'm embarrassed that I just fell back into that behavior. Own it, acknowledge it, show regret, and talk about how it's going to change moving forward. We are human. We are all going to make mistakes and fall back into old patterns on occasion. So own it when that happens. And then accountability, we use judgment to avoid responsibility. We use it to make excuses for the ongoing. This last decade has been a nightmare for me. First, your grandpa got sick and died. Then, my relationship with your dad got bad, and we had to find our way through that. And you were doing so good at school. I knew you were taking care of yourself and you were okay. Well, the adult child very likely didn't feel so okay when all that was going on, and we were focused elsewhere. So we recognize when the problem time was. We recognize the fact that we weren't engaged with them like we would have been if these other things hadn't been going on, and they were going on, and they were a distraction. That's real. It just isn't the adult child's to own. We need to own that. That was our life at the time, and they took it in the shorts because of it. So how do we make amends for that? How do we change now? Can't go back and change the past. So how do we change now and move forward? And that's the amends. So we need to go beyond words and show sincere, consistent behavior change. The apology can be a start, but it shouldn't include excuses. Accountability is when we assure the other person that we understand the harm that was caused to them. We understand it. And we understand we were the ones that caused the harm. Even when there are good reasons. That's a different conversation for a different time. We own it. And as you'll hear adult children say, you were the parent. You should have taken care of this. It was your responsibility. That's what they want us to own. I was a parent. I didn't give you what you needed, and I am sorry for that. And then the amends, we use it when we need more, when words aren't enough and the healing really requires action. The impact on trust when we use these three tools correctly is that the apology, if we don't use sincerity, it sounds hollow. It falls short. Our adult children know when we are not being sincere, when we are blowing smoke, when we are gaslighting. They know it. They feel it just like we know it when they do it. So we can only change our behavior and hope and pray and give opportunities for them to change their behaviors, for their behaviors to come back into a healthy and confident position. So the anger is behind them, so the hurt heals. So we can both come to the middle and start again, or start to rebuild a trust and respect-based relationship. The impact of accountability is that it restores trust and we take responsibility. So the adult child is assured that they were not responsible. It was not because of something they did, or they weren't good enough, or they didn't try hard enough. That's the kind of stuff children take away from situations where their boundaries are not respected, their emotional needs are not met. And even if we're trying our best, the fact is they still weren't met. And so we need to reassure them, even into adulthood, that it had nothing to do with them. It was about us not parenting in a way that met their needs. The amends can actively rebuild trust, and over time, it creates a situation where there's room for forgiveness, there's room for mistakes. And even with humor, you can get to the place where humor still plays a healthy role in communication. Sarcasm and cynicism are gone. It's healthy humor. From the other person's experience, the apology is about expressing our regret to them, but it may not address the full impact. The experience of the other person, the apology might get their attention and pique their interest. Accountability will center on the other person's pain, and it validates their feelings. So now they're fully engaged. Now they're like, wait, what? This is different. This is a different thing that mom's saying now. This is a different take from dad. And then the amends focuses on the other person's needs, their need to feel safe, their need to feel valued and respected and appreciated. The amends moves us into a position where they begin to feel safe again, that we're not going to hurt them. We're not going to undercut them, throw them under the bus, beat up on them emotionally when we're in pain. These three tools can move us into that safe place again. So the apology is to acknowledge harm. The accountability is to show genuine understanding of what we've done to cause pain, and it validates the other person's feelings again. Amends is when the actions are necessary to make things right and to make the words believable, that we're going to act to follow through on what we've shared and what we have done and apologized for. That's kind of a summary of the three: apology, amends, and accountability. I want to let you know I'm offering a couple classes this spring, 2 specifically for moms in honoring Mother's Day and 2 specifically for fathers honoring Father's Day, and how estrangement really moves into the celebration of those events. And I'm going to add some additional classes on things like accountability, apology, and amends. How do we get to that amends so they can hear us? How do we apologize and hold ourselves accountable so the amends letter works? So they believe the amends letter, so it's believable. People make some significant mistakes in those amends letters, and they don't know that they're doing it. They don't understand first how to apologize and how to own it in accountability, and then how to describe and commit to making change in their behavior. That is where the magic happens with those amends letters. When our adult children are ready to hear them, and when our adult children are ready to even read them. I think that's often, according to our adult children, when they answer these surveys, often they don't read them the first few times. It takes 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years until they're ready to hear it. So what do you do in the meantime? Those are the kinds of things we need to talk about in these classes. They're short, predominantly 1 or 2 hours. There might be a couple days where we'll meet, but I just have realized that there's so much more we can talk about. many of you give me such positive feedback about these podcasts, and you don't necessarily need, want, or are able to afford one-on-one coaching. I couldn't when I was estranged. I needed group interactions and activities. There are some lovely Q&A sessions out on the internet, but they're not interactive, and they're massive. There are often hundreds, if not thousands, of people listening to the Q&As. So that's great. It fills a need. But these classes are to really fill a need between the two, between the large group, impersonal Q&A sessions and the one-on-one coaching. So the groups are small, 12 people, maybe 12 to 15, depending on the topic. I facilitate them. And at the end, I love to get feedback from people. What did we miss? What would you like more of? And then we can build additional classes if people are interested. So jump over to that When Our Adult Children Walk Away website. Again, whenouradultchildrenwalkaway.com, and look for the classes and the different activities that are going on. There is a Facebook group now that you can join. That's a trial. We're going to give that a shot and see if it helps people, and if we get feedback that confirms that it's of value to people. I just want to leave you with my gratitude that you are willing to trust me in these conversations, that you come to these podcast episodes and listen, and that you reach out to me. So many of you reach out to me. My email address is janet@jesteinkamp.com. You can find it all over my website. And I do respond personally. It might take me 2 or 3 days, but I do respond. If you don't hear from me, that's not because I didn't respond. It's because it got caught somewhere, in a firewall, in a spam folder, in a junk email folder. Reach out again if you haven't heard from me, so we can figure out where the disconnect is in the technology. All right. So remember to be brave. You are not alone in this. And I'll meet you at the next podcast episode. Hope to see you in class. Thanks again.